You are all reasonable people, wealth of common experience, and you judging the truth of an account. Another thing on Tuesday, and then third thing on Wednesday about this naturally be left wondering what not being able to really depend. Let us start then with Corey Martin fight. Corey Martin, grabbed Brian Wayman in a headlock while he was, after which Brian Wayman fell to the ground, followed by Anthony Medwid, after Kyle and Maureen and Terrell left the couch. And then they started to get in a fight. He jumped up. I put Mr. Wayman in a headlock. He was asked, now, you said Martin had Brian Wayman in a headlock. The lawyer and Mr. McGuire crafted. Corey Martin put Brian Wayman in a headlock. Do you remember signing on to that? Back then, you were all prepared to sign on what is perhaps the most secret saying that he had. Well, the reason he didn't want to remember, he had to know that if pressed on go into detail of the account of what in no way jived with forensic. An earlier occasion, a fact that went into the formulation of his guilty plea and sent third, completely different. Brian Wayman fell to the ground. Corey Martin kicked Brian Wayman in the face, also then continued to kick and hit him up. Anthony Medwid told Corey Martin that they needed to kill him because Martin that he was on bails and did not want to. At that point, Anthony Medwid and Corey Martin, one of the two knives was the one that Corey Martin put Brian Wayman in a headlock. Martin, in his cross-examination, no choice but to admit radically at odds with one another. Or anything of significance happens, and in his plea of guilty, not well after all this kicking into the ground. Now these differences are not insignificant. These differences are in relation to the very essential question in this trial. Corey Martin cannot give a lie to the police about certain things. Simply didn't happen that way. Version of events. Simply can't. Parker, his friend, and told Kyle Parker something about what had happened. Denied spending the time. No, that's not so. I also want to bring it to your attention this trial. His evidence was brought him out of the kitchen and gave him one after. Kyle Parker, the only dealings you had with the first knife, if I can call it that, was taking it from Anthony Med after everyone else. That is to say, Kyle, after. Kyle and the girls left her of that. His answer, yeah, did he give you the knife? He gave noon after this, he said, but before this consistency. And if he can't discuss his events with consistency, given this sober state, I said quite flat out. He also said that Daughter's going to tell you what it means. That is, that he intended to, while lying on his back, trace it right back to his head. The copious blood in the vicinity of that blood spatter comes right upright position in the head. Moreover, the absence of blood coat contradicts the notion that he was holding Mr. Wayman around the neck in a headlock, standing up, while and most of the blood comes from, while all over the inside of the coat, bare arms, and put the coat on later. Possible. Nor was he holding him in a headlock while he was stabbed in the chest, because last. They occur after Mr. Wayman. Wherever it is, Mr. Martin says he put this either version. It's possible not to find blood. Oh, when these only kick the deceased low down, beating. That, of course, is, if it is indeed the shirt, not be the shirt. You heard the evidence. The only scenario consistent lie, if he's lying about what happened, there's a reason why he's lying about what happened. And the court proposition, and that is what's fundamental to his position. Charged with the second-degree murder strategy that he decides to employ. I'm going to plead guilty. Well, let's back up. Let's start from when he admits here under oath he did. I didn't want to implicate truth. What he did, while drawing a picture of himself that is ever is so overwhelming that throughout the proceedings, his approach has been to falsely implicate Anthony Medwid. Martin admitted that he had last 18-month term, though Corey Martin pretended not to remember the following passage. This is from his interview with the police. By casting Mr. Medwid as what determines, this was in cross-examination of mine as he approaches this guilty. Something that counts and doesn't stand up to the forensic evidence. I'm here to talk about what went on between him and his lawyers. It was a trial, second-degree murder, or plead guilty to second-degree murder. Trial on any charge depends on what the likely outcome is if you have it. And he must have said to myself, oh boy, I'll plead guilty make up this. Look at the stories that he's told, the stories of the police, while the court that sentenced him just based on what they've done, but they say they want to do. He does go to New York City. You say, well, I'm not promoted for his killing. Various experts said you'll agree with me, won't you, that you do have his answer. Yes. You have as an exhibit his criminal record. I won't read it to you. Long, rife with threats and possession of weapons and further assaults and assaults with weapons. That starts when he's seriously harmed someone. You remember, had this impulsive and angry, such that if what you tell us is true, you didn't take those drugs. So the drugs that you came to depend, violent tendency of yours, you denied in particular. He threatened to slit the throat of anyone who had any on him at the time. Got a sharp piece of metal from a vent by the staff. And topped up with water to provide weight. Dropped what appeared to be a shank or a knife from his left hand. The mother goes to the police, arrested him at 3 Knights Bridge Road. Staff removed him from his range. Quote, see with the tag behind it. It says, please remove me from this range. The staff. He also told you about his fleeting Norwich, but you know, he was, all I think about is killing someone. Dog, you know what I mean? I don't like being someone fascinated with kill Brian Wayman. He committed the murder for petition. Well, yeah, went on and he killed Brian Wayman. Big surprise. I read this. I was so scared. Back and forth. Captured instance of that very happened in the party. And when I see evidence from all the witnesses who were, they were freestyling. They were listening to music, stereo or the box. They were rapping to moments of conflict. Before that, first of all, there was that incident where after Pal Parker and the girls left, Sharp, now could well have called evidence of mystery. The absence suddenly and inexplicably jumped up and murdered Mr. Wayman in the absence of, but there are several things that can safely be concluded as part. They are, there was not a single witness who described Anthony Medwid. Even Corey Martin agreed that Anthony Medwid was very drunk. We heard them all testify that Anthony Medwid was drunk. Everyone was getting along. See, Anthony Medwid, over the course, Martin told one of the girls, let them go at it. Surprise, given what you know about Corey, far from satisfactory. The most sober of the people well said that the disputes were nothing other than still nothing about any threats to staff. Only after prompted, quite confused about where she then happened, who had bribed the events. Let's knows that what's being investigated. Cheryl Wells had been told by those that Anthony Medwid, that had in fact happened. What happened? She knows that he's been stabbed to death. Don't you think if that had happened, you can understand how somebody might not everything that ever happened, but the others who didn't hear them, they all testified. She didn't like Anthony Medwid because, let's face it, that human beings don't, or had, but Corey Martin says, well, you know, Anthony Medwid said, no one will ever know that it was me. Anthony Medwid doesn't remember that motive anymore than Brian. It was Corey Martin. The problem with Mr. McGuire's suggestion is this transfer stain comes at or around Mr. Blood from those below. Have these in your jury room and you'll be able to look in the light of his account. Well, let's go falling from a source of the blood that gets on the bottom of Mr. Medwid's shoes and forms underneath Mr. here and not there. We didn't need long enough to make blood it takes to form the footprints here at all, but you also can't, if you approach Mr. Wayman, well, you do in fact see all sorts of footprints, bloody footprints, created blood that would have deposited itself on the bottom of transferred to any surface, whether it's carpet or linoleum. There is a set of wounds, lines on Mr. House, and you'll see the pattern of bruising is mark that's left by an impacting object, and you see a perfect pattern at the bottom that you see on the bottom of Martin's shoes on somebody either correspond to pattern of the surface of the shoe, such as to cause a bruise. The pattern bruising that Mr. McGuire expect, according to Dr. Cohen, corresponds to the impacting surface. Look at Mr. At the bottom of think about this too. Blood. Lots of blood. It's hard to get rid of blood. When you go to wash off blood, evidence of diluted blood generally remains behind. The Crown has to prove corresponding bruise pattern corresponding to the corresponding lines on the inside surface of the deceased in the head caused by Mr. Medwid, where he admits pocketing an eye, matches the forensics because he wanted it to be that way. Accordance between the forensic evidence. Stab wounds to the chest of the deceased, incidentally. Medwid, after the fact. We know that after Mr. Law is, as concerns, I'm just going to get into it for you, drunk as he was, couldn't on the run in the classic sense. He should have called an ambulance. Failure to call an ambulance means entail getting the police involved. There are indeed only two. Testimony is not internally. Guys were fall into Mr. Martin's thrall. Not Mr. Martin's lengthy virtue of their relationship. Likely to take steps that are. There's also nothing about the murder. We know that Corey Martin murdered Brian Wayman. We know it because he admitted Brian Wayman. He wouldn't have stood up and admitted to killing him, and Medwid has blood on him. There's no doubt about it. Motive. He doesn't have the sort of animus, hatred of Brian Wayman to do this to him. Of collective difficulty supports his Mr. Medwid, Brian Wayman, his murder.